Members of Council, if you can please take your seats. This meeting is now resumed. If I can ask members of Council to please rise. Please rise for a moment of silence, and during this time, remember the victims of the attack in Christchurch, New Zealand. Thank you. Members, we have a presentation this morning to recognize the city's new poet laureate. I would like to call upon Mayor Tory to come forward for the presentation.
Well, good morning, Speaker and colleagues, and I am very pleased to be able to lead the Council today in welcoming Toronto's new Poet Laureate, Mr. Al Moritz. And I want to start by welcoming him together with Ann Michaels, who's here, our current Poet Laureate, and to say, because it's also an occasion for us here as a Council to say thank you to her. This is something where she has, and I'll mention in particular one occasion when she, I think, proved one of the many parts of value received from having such a position, namely at the time of the Yonge Street van attack last year. But it's also an appropriate time because April is National Poetry Month. And a lot of people may say, well, you know, why does that matter? It matters because I think many of us in this room, based on our commitment to investment in the arts and culture, have figured out the connection not just between the arts and culture and a healthy, vibrant, creative, compassionate society here in Toronto, but also the direct connection, as I'm sure Deputy Mayor Thompson would attest, to economic development. When we went to meet, for example, with the people from Amazon when we were in that contest, they asked us more questions about the sort of the arts and cultural life and the quality of life of the city and the fabric of what put that together than they did about many other things you might have expected them to ask about. And so it's certainly been a priority of mine, but I know it's been a shared priority with many members of Council for us to continue to invest in the arts and culture. And indeed, our budget chief made sure this year that in a year when it was tough and when it would have been easy to say, well, you know, we're going to sacrifice that, that even in this year we made an additional new investment. And so I'll certainly continue to be supportive, as I know we will in this room, of those who want to advance our city through the arts and culture and who also do a fantastic job of representing us and what we stand for as Canadians and who we are around the world. Now, the position of Poet Laureate, again, there'd probably be people out there watching us and people who watch these things who would say, you know, what's that all about? Why do you have such a person? And I think it is very important to remember that this is actually a historic appointment of very high prestige. In days gone by, these were the people, the laureates, who recorded history through poetry. And of course, we've come a long way. Some of us might say it would be better if we went back to those days of having poets record as opposed to other means of doing so. But the bottom line is that today, what it does is it allows us to take important occasions and to have them imbued with that very special sense of the arts and culture through poetry, and also to perhaps comment or reflect upon history more so than to be the people who record it. The person who's selected, and it's done by a selection committee, which in this case included Ann Michaels as the incumbent, is selected as someone who writes outstanding poetry, who's written on themes relevant to the people who live in the city and relevant to the city itself. And of course, part of the job is to serve as well as an advocate for not just poetry but for the arts in general. And I hope that Mr. Moritz in his new assignment will feel free to do that, because, you know, we need to be pushed on these things to make sure that we're doing these things adequately. Now, Al Moritz is a remarkable poet who's known globally for his work. He's one of my favorite kinds of people in that he is a transplanted American who has become even the most fervent and enthusiastic of Canadians. And I always find, it's like people who move here from BC and Alberta who were skeptical when they got here, but to really recognize what a great place this is to live and to make your home. I think people who have read anything about Al's biography will see that he's got an incredibly diverse series of career accomplishments, ranging through being an executive, an editor, an author. He's been involved in the advertising business. He's done a lot of different things, but of course he's most renowned for his poetry, and it has really been, in the judgment of others, poetry that has helped to shape our literary community. He's published 20 books of poetry, which have received many national and international honors, including the Griffin Poetry Prize. 3 of his books have been finalists for the Governor General's Award, and currently he is the Blake Goldring Professor of the Arts and Society at Victoria University, part of the University of Toronto, of course. So, Al, congratulations on your appointment, and we're going to be asking you to come up here in a moment to read a poem that you've composed specifically for this day on which you become our Poet Laureate. But before doing that, I just do want to extend a very sincere word of thanks, I'm sure, on behalf of all members of Council and on behalf of the people of the City of Toronto for the job that Anne Michaels has done in this position. She has been a dedicated literary ambassador since becoming Poet Laureate in late 2015. She has been and continues to be a champion of Toronto, and we have felt her presence and the power of her words and her ability to capture the moment many, many times. I myself have been in her presence many times over the course of the last number of years, but no time more particular than the vigil of the van attack. Her words, her presence, the essence of the office that she represents, I think helped to bring comfort at a time, and I'm sure Councillor Fillion will agree, on that night that was part of those series of days that we were in a daze, I think, in some respects, as a result of this terrible thing happening in our city. And she managed, as talented people like her and like Al can do, to sum up the soul of our city. And just 2 lines from the poem, I think, spoke a lot to who we are. And I'll just quote: "We will not surrender how we will love. How we love, we will not surrender those we love." And I think that those words and those that went around them brought great comfort. So, Anne, I want to say thank you for those words, which gave us strength and love when we needed it the most, and proved the value of having somebody that does this. And I want to say thank you for helping to choose our incoming Poet Laureate. It was a 5-person panel that was unanimous, and I would just say how proud that we are to be in the presence of 2 such great Canadian artists, literary legends, and proud of what they represent for our city. And on that note, I would like to welcome Al to come up to the podium and to read his poem that has actually been put together not just for today, but more importantly for the National Poetry City Challenge, where we're behind you 1,000%. It's called "By St. Nicholas Ukrainian Catholic Church." And so, Al, congratulations. Thank you for being here. You've got the poem in your head. I have a copy here. But
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for those wonderful remarks. I thank you and all who are involved in the Poet Laureateship for this honor and opportunity: Council, the Economic and Community Development Committee, its cultural staff, the selection panel, the wonderful poets who have filled the position. As National Poetry Month begins, we can ask how to keep poetry central in our lives. I favor something simple and basic: give it space. In all our actions, continue to protect and expand the spaces in our physical city and in our spiritual city where poetry can flourish, so that it is there for anyone who may come to wish to hear it and respond. Then everything else in the city will tend to rise, come together, and create. The poet experiences creation in its full depth and intensity as discovery, communication, and work. The poet creates by means of humankind's most intimate, complex tool, the word, a tool that is one with the human body and soul. The poet knows that at each new instant all things lie in a potential justice and beauty which is waiting to be made. Here's a short poem of my own about these days we are now living, the cusp of March and April. The church it refers to is on Bellwoods Avenue in the Queen West and Niagara Street area. So probably everyone will know that area. By St. Nicholas Ukrainian Catholic Church. March, my Lord, was stillborn. April waits in mud. How long will I stay beside the street in this thin house and hear bottles breaking by night? All day the trucks pass by so close, just across the narrow, cracking sidewalk, and I turn up rubber and glass in the mud by the door while I plant potatoes. When I first came here, it was good from the alley to see so many small houses leaning together and the row of garages. Each flat roof sloped back at a different lazy pitch. Each wall had a different dress, peeling rolls of red asphalt brick, peeling white asphalt stone, wood paneling, battered aluminum, doors painted red and orange, windows trimmed grass green and aquamarine, no angle right, no two lines parallel, the drooping wires from listing poles, a car without wheels, a twisted bicycle. Then from the patchwork, a man stepped out, unshaven, gray-stubbled, nearly old, into the thick malt odor from the brewery. As if dazed by the low blue sky and rush of clouds pouring down from the north, he stops outside the door. His thick body sways on stiff legs. The khaki work pants flap, and a young dog twirls around his legs in the wind. Then it runs far off, but always looks back until slowly the man comes. That was another muddy April, Lord, with glass and paper in the alley puddles, though not as much as today. Not a bud showed yet on the trees along the streets, endlessly straight. To north and south you could see, so far away that few who went there ever returned, the roofs and steeples of other worlds. Thanks, everybody. Merci à tous.
Have you already?
Yeah, a lot of
Thank you. Councillor Grimes, I understand you wish to make an announcement.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise on a point of privilege as Chair of Exhibition Place. And I was going to show you a short video, which I'm going to show you in a minute, but I thought I would take this opportunity. I didn't know our CEO, Diane Young, was with us this morning, our fearless leader down Exhibition Place, but she's going to be retiring in the next couple of months. So I thought this might be my only opportunity to recognize her in this council chamber. So Diane's been with the city for over 33 years, 22 Exhibition Place CEO, and I can tell you, I'm sure Councillor Layton and Councillor Cressy and Councillor Perks, being the local councillors, have worked with Diane. She's been a pleasure to work with as chair for me. Wealth of experience, came in as a lawyer, but has done some great work down at Exhibition Place, and you're going to see that in a minute, the gathering spot. But Diane, I just wanted to take this opportunity to recognize all the great your public service for the city. With that, Laura Purdy is with her, that works great work on our sales and marketing team. They put this video together as an Exhibition Place. It's not C&E, it's Exhibition Place. That's the myth. But we have a great video to show you that Exhibition Place is a gathering spot. And please enjoy the video. And Diane, again, thank you for your 33 years of service. Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's right at the end.
Members of council, we will now review and confirm the order paper. There are 46 items left on the agenda. Our first item this morning is EX
What do you want in?
EX 3.11. Oh, sorry, Councillor Grimes. On the 2019 Toronto Zoo Lumina experience. Yesterday, Council started the debate on item PH 2.3, zoning revisions for municipal shelters. I propose that Council return to that item after EX 3.11. City Council will consider member motions at 2 p.m. Our first item after members' motion is item PH 3.1 on as-of-right zoning for secondary suites. Council will then consider reports from the Integrity Commissioner and the Ombudsman. Item CC 5.4 will be considered first, followed by item CC 5.1 and item CC 5.2. I will now take release of member holds. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Trying to move things along, EX 3.11, which is actually timed for 9:30. I do have a motion and amendment that we've worked with zoo staff, our CFO, everybody's happy with it. If I can put it on the screen and move it. Basically puts the onus on, we're going to borrow money for this event from the Toronto Foundation, which is where we have the Toronto Zoo has its donations as we work on our own foundation. So this brings zero risk to the City of Toronto. We do need to amend our budget because the budget's already been approved. There's zero cost or risk to the city. This money's coming from our foundation. CFO is happy with it, and so I'd like to move this amendment.
All in favor of pandas?
Okay. Yeah, just a sec. Okay, so let's hold the item down then. Yeah, it is the first item, so it's not a quick release, so we'll hold it down. Yes, okay. Councillor McKelvey, you've got your name under request to speak. Okay, that goes on request to question staff. Okay. No, the other side. Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, Speaker, page 4. CC 5.5, appointment of public members to the Toronto Licensing Tribunal. I'll let release that.
Okay. That's on page 4, CC 5.5. Councillor Fletcher is releasing. On favor, carried. Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yesterday was circulated an amendment to SC 4.5, and so I'm prepared to release it with a recorded vote. The amendment just creates a 30-meter buffer between a golf course and the Toronto Wildlife Centre. It's a staff amendment.
Which page? Oh, 4.
Okay. Yeah. That's on page 4, SC 4.5. Okay, so we'll continue holding it. Councillor Cole.
Yes, I'd like to release EC 2.8, business improvement areas. I asked for a copy of the budgets in my ward, and I received them, and I'd like to release it.
Okay. That's on page 3, EC 2.8. Councillor Cole's releasing. All in favor? Carried. And I've also reviewed a couple of urgent motions to be added to the agenda. We can put them on the screen. Councillor Fletcher, you have 2.
Yes, I do, Speaker.
Yeah, she spoke to him this morning. Did it go okay?
I did. This has to do with a technical amendment on a zoning matter that staff have provided me, and the other has to do with the liquor license that's been applied for.
Okay, on favor, carried. The next one.
Are you good on the patios?
There's a motion I'm making. That's the second one. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Bradford?
Thanks very much. We need to add this motion as there's a decision required at the LPAT. And so we've had this come forward from staff, and we need to make a decision on it.
All in favor? Carried. Councillor Cressy?
This is urgent as it is a liquor license matter, and the deadline for objections is before the next council meeting.
All in favor? Carried. That's it. Okay, all those in favor of adopting the order paper, recorded vote.
Councillor Fletcher, please.
Councillor Wong Tam, please.
Councillor Fletcher, your vote, please.
The motion to adopt the order paper carries unanimously, 21 in favor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll go to the first item that was timed this morning, which is on page 3, Executive Committee EX 3.11. Okay. Okay, so Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong, you have questions, right? Okay, Councillor Pasternak, please. Okay.
I'll ask this of our finance staff. Have you reviewed the motion?
Through the chair, yes, I have.
So it says, City Council increased the approved operating budget for the Toronto Zoo by $5 million gross, fully funded by a disbursement of undesignated funds held for the Toronto Zoo from the Toronto Foundation. Can you maybe explain that in terms that the public can understand?
Sure. Through the chair, just to take a step back at Exec Committee a week ago, the proposal was that the foundation that sits as an independent organization from the zoo would guarantee the loan, thus creating zero risk for the city. As we explored that option, we identified the fact that the funds do exist in the foundation. So the foundation is now funding the zoo's activity with regards to this exhibit. So what we have to do is enable the zoo to incur the expense. So we have to increase their budget, acknowledging that the funds to offset that increase in the budget are coming from the foundation. So the net fiscal impact is zero.
How much money is there in the Toronto Foundation?
Through the chair, I actually don't know. I do know I was given assurance that the $5 million exists in the foundation.
Well, maybe, Madam Chair, I think the CEO of the Toronto Zoo is here. Maybe he can tell us how much money is in the foundation's account.
Currently, there's about $12 million in that account.
I see. And what are those funds normally used for? And the reason why I'm asking is if you guarantee for $5 million and the money doesn't come through, usually the money is used for other things, and if that $5 million is not there, the zoo may come back and ask for that money in some other form. So what is that? What would that $12 million? Have you earmarked that money for other projects that are now off the table?
So currently, those are undesignated funds right now, so they have not been earmarked.
I see. And what does the foundation, how much money does it normally raise every year?
So we've just begun the process of reestablishing the Toronto Zoo Wildlife Conservancy. Our previous foundation was dissolved in 2009, and those funds have been with the Toronto Foundation since that point, incurring interest, and this is the first time we've accessed them in quite some time.
Okay, so you've had this $12 million, it doesn't, and you really hadn't, Had you had some sort of idea of what those funds would have otherwise be used for?
Working with staff, much of those funds, independent of the undesignated, are earmarked for things such as the orangutan project. So there are designated purposes for, say, endangered species work and that type of thing. But the funds we're looking to access are undesignated ones that are legacy funds from the transfer in 2009.
And just one other question. Do we have your assurance that you'll keep that $5 million aside?
Yeah, absolutely. That's, essentially what we're going to do is be borrowing those funds to cover the Lumina experience and repaying it to the Toronto Foundation instead of going through the City of Toronto.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Some of my questions were just asked, and I'm worried about risk management here. It's not the first time the zoo has come to us for fundings for a hypothetical project. This Moment Factory, that's a corporation that is under contract to the zoo?
So Moment Factory is an organization we've chosen to work with based on a request for proposal process. So we put out a request, we received answers, and then having evaluated them, we felt they were the most suitable to provide that wow, amazing experience at our zoo.
And have staff done a due diligence on this company, their track record, their ability to deliver?
Yeah, our choice of going with Moment Factory is because they are a legitimate world-class digital interactive company. They've worked with zoos across the world. They've worked with leading sports organizations, leading artists and musicians. So if you, if we were to pull up a YouTube video, you'd see it's pretty safe to say Moment Factory can be considered best in show.
So they will be paid. Now, what worst case scenario, the zoo cannot repay the foundation? Is that?
Correct. That would be us. Worst case scenario, if it were to occur, we would not be returning some of those undesignated funds to the foundation, so we wouldn't have them for a future project.
Right. And what foundation projects would be at risk if those funds aren't returned?
Well, currently they're undesignated funds, so it would be funds that we wouldn't be able to access. I'm a little reluctant to say we're going to enter a new strategic planning process this year and start mapping that out and working with our community to identify what those areas will be.
So in recent years, what has our foundation funds been used for?
Quite frankly, to my knowledge, I started 6 months ago, those foundation funds have been largely in that account gaining interest and not been accessed for quite some time.
What's the philosophy of the foundation? What would they normally be used for and accessed for?
So the Toronto Zoo Foundation was actually folded in 2009. The new Toronto Zoo Wildlife Conservancy that will be using these funds, their mission is to support the strategic direction of the Toronto Zoo and to raise funds to help us implement our strategic and master plans.
All right, but the funds are being taken from the Toronto Foundation, not the Zoo Foundation.
So what happened was the Toronto Zoo Foundation was folded in 2009, and those assets moved to the Toronto Foundation, who manages hundreds of millions of dollars for not-for-profits across the community. So they are just shepherds of those funds.
Just one final question. Is there a payback schedule embedded in this? In other words, when do the first payments start?
Yeah, our plan remains to pay this back in 3 years for the very reason you've asked. We want to have these funds available for the next suite of projects as we move to our 50th birthday.
Now, I don't want to be negative, but the zoo is losing anywhere from $30,000 to $40,000 a day. What is the likelihood that you're going to be able to pay it back?
We wouldn't have brought this to council if we didn't feel this was a phenomenal idea that's going to change people's perception of the zoo, that's going to bring them to the zoo at a time of year when we have space, and remind people that we're open year-round.
We heard this about the pandas as well. Is this different?
I can't speak to the pandas because I wasn't here at that time. But you know what? We didn't make this recommendation on our own. We did a significant landscape scan of zoos and aquariums and parks and botanical gardens across North America and beyond. We worked with a leading consulting company called Zoo Advisors, and over again, this light concept, when combined with a space like ours, came up as what we feel is one of our best bets to really increase the profile of our zoo and give us a great new way to talk about our conservation programming.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
This is not so much about the animals as about getting people to the zoo site, and then they'll be part of looking at your, what you call your collection. Is that correct? You're not shining lights on the animals.
That's correct. Part of, over here.
Where are you?
I'm over here. To your right. To your right. Hi.
Oh, hi.
A key part of working with an organization like Moment Factor is they've put on these presentations in zoos, such as the Singapore Zoo, so they have experience working with living animals in our care. Animal welfare is a key tenet of our zoo, and whatever we do, we'll be taking that into account to make sure we're not jeopardizing that in any way. The other key thing about this program is this is the good news story. This is talking about our world 100 years from now, assuming we've done it right, and giving people the tools they need to take those steps to affect conservation.
Yes, and this is your winter. This is to boost your numbers all round, or targeting a particular season?
We're starting in winter, but we believe this is a tool we'll be able to also use in summer for sleepovers as well. It gets dark very late, but we're mapping out our plan. The plan we built, we have a lot of confidence in the fall, winter, spring, and we look to expand it there.
Now, how many acres have you got out there at the zoo?
It's approximately 700 acres, but
700, and how many are actually have the facility attached to that 700? How many acres are used by the facility itself, not open space?
I'm sorry, I'm struggling with the question.
Well, you have 700 acres as your site.
Yes.
And then you have all the places where you actually have your animal facilities. So your built form covers how much of that site?
We have 10 plus kilometers of trails that move through our sites. We have large paddocks. I think I understand you, but it's more than half the site, if I was to guess, looking at parking lots,
Okay.
paddocks, and the rest of it.
Is dedicated to animals, animal welfare, management of the animals.
Correct.
Amenities for tourists that are coming out there.
Correct.
And you have trails and things in there. How popular are they in the winter?
That's another program we're looking at. We used to have...
How many people go there on the trails in the winter?
I'd have to check my stats to give you a specific number.
Would you like to get back to me on that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Have you ever considered what's coming very, Mr. Ubbins is not here, but combining with the Parks Department, there are skate trails that are becoming terribly popular. Richmond Hill has developed a great skate trail. Everybody's going up there. Is that something you've even thought about?
Yeah, we explored...
Much cheaper.
Yeah, we were looking at our past, and historically we did have skating. We had cross-country skiing. We had snowshoeing.
Did you have a skate trail?
Not a skate trail specifically, but this is a product that we explored, and we found there were many offerings that were free with skate trails, and we weren't convinced people would pay for that experience because it wouldn't be unique nor specific to the zoo.
Oh, I see. So you want them to pay to use the other 350 acres rather than trying to get people to the site and then getting in to see the animals in the winter.
Well, our goal
I'm
is
just not sure of your marketing around that.
Our goal is to get more and more people to the zoo, and part of our excitement about Lumina is this lets us tell a conservation story that's specific to the zoo in a way that's not available elsewhere in Toronto.
And what would the cost to get in be?
We have a couple different models that range from as low as $15 per children up to $25 per adult.
And what's the, is that your cost that you're telling us that it will be? $15 per entry for a child under 16, let's say, or under 12, and then $25 for an adult.
So we've built our funding model with it as low as 15 for children and up to 25 to adults.
And what's your top end?
25 for adults. So we are still working within that window and working with our partners to determine whether that's going to be $16.95 and modeling that compared to what else is going on in our landscape in Toronto. So we want to be comparable.
So I just want to be clear. So for a family of 4, that would be $80, or around $100 to go to Lumina. So how many times would people go? Probably one time.
It's the kind of experience that we assume people would go once and they'd be looking to bring their friends, and it's also an experience that we think reaches beyond our traditional constituency of families with children and will appeal to other generations. And that's a key element of these shows and these evening activities that we've seen in other sites.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. With respect to the funds that are held in the Toronto Foundation, those funds are exclusively for the use of the Toronto Zoo, is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Those are funds that moved over from the previous Toronto Zoo Foundation that the Toronto Foundation holds.
And so what you're asking for us to do today is to increase the operating budget because it was already adopted, and you will draw those funds from the Toronto Foundation that's earmarked for the zoo, and then flow that through a separate entity that will now manage this Lumina experience. Is that correct?
We're looking to bring the funds from the Toronto Foundation to pay for that $5 million to offset it, so there's no net increase to the city. Correct.
And why are you, by way of the accounting, why are you setting up a separate project to manage as opposed to managing under the umbrella of the zoo?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm following you. We're looking to add $5 million to our operating budget and then offset that essentially with $5 million coming from the foundation, and then the proceeds also going to the foundation to repay.
Okay, so it's not setting up a separate project management for those funds?
We're looking to operate...
It's all integrated?
We're looking for this to be part of our budget, and it's a different revenue source with that $5 million coming from the Toronto Foundation.
Okay, and thank you. So then with respect to the overall strategy of using this sort of user-enhanced experience and visitor experience coming to the zoo, how would you sustain that over a period of time?
So a key element to this is that it does evolve, and you can actually adapt and write new stories. This is our initial conservation story offering, talking about this idealistic future where we've done things right, where we're connecting people to the natural world so they're saving animals. We can actually update that entire program and continue to have it change and evolve to have different offerings that will appeal to different audiences.
When will this new visitor experience begin and end? How long is this supposed to be?
Our goal was to launch it this fall and have it run for a minimum of 3 years.
And for 3 years. And have you studied the impact on the animals and what that looks like? And can you tell us what type of methodology you used?
Right. So a key element to this is making sure we look after animal welfare. So the first thing we did is when we drafted the route, it's primarily through areas that aren't with animals on it. We have 10 plus kilometers of trails, so it's mapped there. And then we're looking to go to areas where the animals are often indoors at night or off exhibit and can go to areas where they would not be at risk. So that's a key component and a key area where Moment Factory has a lot of experience working in the Singapore Zoo, making sure animal welfare is not jeopardized, making sure they're not subjected to lights or anything that would cause them discomfort.
There's a vibrant night culture in Singapore that we don't necessarily have in Toronto, or at least we're trying to foster that nighttime economy. There's also temperature and climate changes. Singapore is warm all year round. It doesn't snow. There is no extreme weather conditions. How would you just adjust your numbers according to the fact that what may work in Singapore may not work in Toronto?
That's a great question, and a key part of looking at this and working with Moment Factory is installations they have in Quebec, installations they've done in the shoulder season at Fort Henry and Kingston. And you know, we live in a world where we're getting more and more weather warnings, but when we actually look at the data, we have the room, if there's extreme cold, to move these guests to other parts of the week. And we want to foster a culture where people are getting outside, they're reconnecting with nature. There's very little really bad weather, there's just some bad clothing choices, and I think that's part of the dialogue with this kind of experience.
And with respect to the, just coming back to animal welfare, because this one is nagging at me, to be quite honest. Oftentimes, there have been quite a bit of studies, a lot of documentation out there about the neurological effects on animals, the mental health of animals in captivity. Adding another layer of high-level entertainment value doesn't necessarily speak to the animal welfare, and I'm really trying to follow your logic here. How can we, is there a third-party review of your assessment on how this is going to impact animals?
Well, one of the key things we'll be doing is doing pre and post and during monitoring of these animals and having that baseline data. We're going through some structural changes at the zoo, and one of those changes includes a full-time person responsible exclusively for animal welfare and using methodologies developed at leading accredited facilities across the world to make sure that those animals are not in harm's way, that they're not stressed, that it's not causing any negative impact.
Shouldn't you do that before you subject these animals to 3 years of a new visitor-enhanced experience that's designed and tailored only to entertain human beings and not looking after the welfare of animals?
So this conservation program will be required to go through a vigorous vetting process, and we'll bring the people in to take a look at the impacts it could have at the animals beforehand, and we'll be routing this based on a philosophy of not causing a negative impact to those animals. So that's part of the planning process, and that's our chicken and egg challenge. We can't actually plan the route until we get a little further, and we need to plan that route so it doesn't have a negative impact on animals.
Thank you. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the CFO, the motion, the amendment that I put forward that your staff helped me draft. So what's the risk level to the City of Toronto with the amendment?
Through the Speaker, there's no risk to the city.
No risk at all?
None at all.
The previous motion, we were looking at guaranteeing a loan from the City of Toronto to the zoo, which was going to be backstopped, for lack of a better word, by the foundation. So there was risk there.
That's correct. With the new motion that's being proposed, the city is not providing any funding for this particular exhibit. It's coming 100% from the foundation.
This is a pretty standard motion for the City of Toronto.
There's no
when it comes
risk.
to budgeting.
There's no risk for the city.
No risk. Okay, thank you. Mr. De Jong, I wanted to ask, so this project at the board at the Toronto Zoo was unanimously approved?
Correct. We brought a presentation from the recommended vendor to the zoo, and yeah, it was unanimously selected and really enthusiastically endorsed.
We have so I'm the chair of the board of directors of the Toronto Zoo. We have a strategic plan and a master plan, strategic plan. We're very focused on conservation, animal care as well. This project meets all of the goals and objectives of the zoo's strategic plan?
It aligns incredibly closely to the plan that was approved by this council, with 4 of the 7 goals having direct connections to this initiative.
Yep. And so one of the things that was brought up at the board meeting as we evaluated this was animal care. I know there's been some concerns here. This is a light show that illustrates the conservation program, highlights what's happening at the zoo. And I know that animal care was a concern, as it always is with members of the board. So there's no animals actually involved in this Lumina light show at any time, is there?
So this experience will be a 45 to 60 minute experience wandering on trails through the aquarium, through the zoo, and we will be making sure animals are not negatively impacted in any way.
In any way whatsoever. And they're not involved in any way whatsoever.
No, we may have supporting animals in displays around, but they're not part of the story in this case.
Okay. And so your tenure at the Toronto Zoo, you've been the CEO for 6 months now. Before that, you were at the Vancouver Aquarium. You have a wealth of experience. It's one of the reasons we hired you to start bringing innovation and new approaches to the zoo, both to get people through the gates, how the zoo is run. There's been some comments around risk. We had this discussion at the zoo. Nothing can be done without any level of risk, but you're confident with the business plan, looking at other venues where this event was done, that will have minimal financial risk.
That's correct. This is a model that we are really excited about, that's demonstrated highly profitable in several different venues and several different formats, and we think it's a great addition to the east end of the city. We think it's going to draw people from further afield, and it has great connections to our community as far as getting people into the city at a time of year where we're looking to boost growth.
Okay, and around the money, so we did away with our previous foundation in 2009. We're in the midst of restructuring, rebuilding the foundation. The money's parked with the Toronto Foundation. The level of risk there. So one of the goals at the zoo is to try and be more financially self-sufficient, and we have like Magla pilot project. The city's supporting our winter zoo mobile. So this is another innovative project we're looking at bringing to make the zoo more self-sufficient, cover off our conservation program, promote our world-class conservation programs that the zoo's involved in, but also the level of care we look after with the animals, correct?
Right. This is the kind of program that you're seeing more and more in modern world-class accredited facilities like our zoo, and we really believe we can deliver it at a high level. We think our community is going to be excited about it, and the animals are always our first priority, will not be negatively impacted by this initiative.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. That's it for the questions. So to speak, Councillor Ainsley, you held the item down.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I do have a motion that I would like to have put on the screen. As you heard from the answers from Ms. Taylor, our CFO, this is a basic financial arrangement. The Toronto Zoo has money with a foundation. There's no risk to the City of Toronto. This is a pretty standard financial arrangement that you see often. It's net zero. We're taking the money out of the foundation. That money comes from people that believe in the zoo, that they made donations to the zoo. It supports the zoos. This was unanimously approved at the Board of Directors of the Toronto Zoo after a pretty extensive meeting, a presentation by Moment. We asked questions very specifically about the finances, how we get it, how we're going to see that money back. We do understand, there's been some concerns over the budget at the Toronto Zoo and attendance. This really meets our strategic plan goals, getting people into the zoo, our conservation. We've been told to be more innovative at the zoo if we want to continue to see support from the City of Toronto, which is what we want, but at the same time, our long-term goal is to be financially independent of the Toronto Zoo, at the main time looking after the animals, promoting our world-class conservation program. Once again, there's no risk at all by doing this with the City of Toronto. It's here to be approved because our budget was already approved. This was sent out to an RFP. It was thoroughly vetted by the zoo staff. One of the reasons it is here, I would have liked to have seen it within our budget program that was just passed. Unfortunately, the timing of the RFP that we sent out and the schedule with the zoo board, we couldn't get it into the zoo budget process in time. But once again, there's no risk to City Council and the taxpayers by this project, and I have every faith, as does the Board of Directors of the Toronto Zoo. Our animals will be looked after during this. It's going to promote our conservation program, and I would ask for everybody's support on this. Thank you.
Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll be supporting Councillor Ainsley's motion. I had a chance to talk to our new CEO just the other day, and he brings a wealth of experience coming from the Vancouver Aquarium, and we had a brief chat yesterday. And our CFO has said this is no risk to this council, but I remember over the years the Toronto Zoo down here, hat in hand looking for funds, but I think they're being innovative and stepping out of the box and trying to get people out to the zoo. And I know the CEO invited me to go to the zoo. I was on the board, but I invite you. If you have concerns about the animal welfare, I'm sure our new CEO would love to give you a tour of what's happening out there. They're doing great work out there, and I'll tell you, from being on that board and touring the zoo many times, our staff out there, the animals are number one. All the staff there. Animals will come first, and if there's any danger to these animals whatsoever, this would not be supported by our staff and by our new CEO, I can tell you that for sure. So with that, I take up, I'm sure Mr. Jean would love to have you come out and visit the zoo, go out there, look what they're doing. This was passed by their board unanimously, and I think they are trying to get the budget. Our budget chief should be happy with this, that they are stepping outside the box, so I'm going to be supporting Councillor Ainsley.
I thought we were supposed to put people first. Animals first. Animals first.
Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I will not be supporting the motion before us, and of course I recognize that those who are on the zoo board are trying to provide good stewardship and management of a facility that serves a particular purpose. But I actually am challenged with the purpose of this facility. And the challenge, of course, is the talk about conservation in the zoo world. Where the zoo lexicon is really about still talking about animals in captivity. And all the good intentions, at the end of the day, what it is animals in captivity for our entertainment. There may have been, at a particular point in time, some educational value, I believe, that zoos may have served. But in this particular era, that is all long has moved on and changed. I'm not satisfied, Madam Speaker, with the response that there will be adequate review and studies of the animals' well-being before, during, and after. It has to be done well in advance. And what I'm seeing is that this particular initiative right now is led by a desire to bring enhanced visitor experiences to the zoo. Well, let me tell you, in the downtown area that I work in, and many of you will recognize this, is that we're always looking for enhanced visitor experiences. How do we bring the wow factor to Yonge Street? How do we ensure we have the wow factor in the museums and the galleries? How do we create a wow factor along the waterfront? And Moment Factory is a company that I'm sure will deliver. They've delivered at the Super Bowl, they've delivered at the Olympics, they have delivered around the world. But that's what they do. They create the digital light show. And it is purely entertainment. It's no greater than walking through an aquarium where you actually don't get a lot of education, but it's almost like a very dynamic screensaver of watching the fish and the sharks swim around. Imagine your world in the natural environment being endless oceans and then being put into a bowl. Imagine your environment as a majestic elephant roaming the African Sahara and then being put into a small little contained area. That's, at the end of the day, why I can't support this. I do think that there needs to be a longer strategy about what true conservation is, and true conservation is about protecting the natural environment where the animals are, whether they're in continental Africa or perhaps in Asia or even here in North America. We should be protecting those natural environments for the animals. If we truly deeply care about conservation, true natural conservation, then that's what we would be doing, not necessarily exporting animals from abroad and bringing them here and then making their world this big, where they have the entire desert, the entire rainforest, and we put them into small little areas, even though we are giving them excellent care, but it's not a natural environment for those animals. They're held in captivity, and they're there largely for entertainment. And that, to me, is my fundamental challenge here, and which is why I can't support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm a new appointee to the Toronto Zoo Board, and I had an excellent tour there of their scientific facility that they have, and they are developing real state-of-the-art techniques, including metabolomics, and I've done this sort of research in the past, and I was only able to do it on urine, so I was very excited to hear that this is something that's now been expanded into analysis of animal poop. And it's really exciting, the sorts of techniques that they're doing, because these techniques are developed in the zoo and then can be rolled out into the real world to learn what's happening to these species in nature. They also have an intensive breeding program that's there. If you do a tour of the facility, you can see that there's still panda sperm that's on site and that we're still contributing to panda reproduction in the world. This is a good thing. In addition, they have a blanding turtle reproduction facility where turtles are being bred and released into Rouge Park. A lot of this is being done in partnership with the academic community, with very smart scientists. There's lots of interns, there's lots of students. It's a great educational experience, not just for the public, but also for the scientific community at large. In addition, as you go on this tour, and I invite you all to do it, it was very, very eye-opening. They tell you that a lot of this is about choice for the animals. They can choose to be up close. They can go into the back. It's about giving them choice. It's about giving them enrichment in learning experiences. And while nobody likes the idea of animals in captivity, what's really great is that people are seeing these animals, and by seeing them, they care. They feel that they are bought into conservation. They want to protect them in the wild. They want to protect them in the African savanna. But in addition, this new experience through Illumina, I just want to reiterate, it's not just about a light show. The theme of it is very beautiful. The theme is, it's 100 years out, we've done everything right. It's not post-apocalyptic. This is about the future that we can have if we work together. So on that basis, I strongly urge everyone to support this motion that has been brought forward for us today, so that the Toronto Zoo can expand their reach into the conservation world and share with even more citizens why we need to care about ecological integrity, why we need to care about all of these animals, many of them that are on the brink of extinction. Thank you.
Well said, Joe.
Thank you. Okay, that's it for the speakers. Can put the amendment on the screen. Okay, recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, please. The motion carries 16 to 5.
Thank you. That's the item. Okay, we'll go back to page 3, PH 3.2, which is the zoning revisions for municipal shelters. We do have a speakers list, and we were in the middle of asking questions. Councillor Perks, questions?
First of all, to the chief planner, I want to understand, if there's a proposal for a shelter and it requires that we alter the building in a way that doesn't conform with the zoning bylaw, will there be a public process?
If the through the chair, if the proposed shelter does not comply with the performance standards in the zoning bylaw, first of all, it has to comply with the land use provisions, and if it doesn't comply with the performance standards, the proponent, in this case the city, would have to seek variances at the Committee of Adjustment, or, depending on the extent of the variances, come forward for a zoning bylaw amendment.
And
with that process, there would be a public
a public process. And I just want to pick up on part of your answer. If it was a change of use, say from industrial to residential, that too would trigger a public process.
A more extensive one around an official plan amendment, yes.
Right. So, in effect, by saying that it's now as of right, all we're doing is saying that our zoning bylaw no longer discriminates about which kind of person can reside in a permitted residential zone.
The specific changes we're making are to 2 performance standards around the separation distance and distance from a main road, and to the extent that those provisions discriminate based on user and not the use, that's correct.
And it is just a basic principle in planning that we zone the use, not the user.
It's not only a principle, but a principle that's been tested in law up to the Supreme Court.
Perhaps I can get the city solicitor. Can you stop my time while we get the city solicitor? Hi. So we've just heard from Mr. Lintern that there is case law from the Supreme Court of Canada that governments cannot use zoning to zone the user. We can only use it to zone the use. Do you concur with that analysis?
That is correct.
And there have been human rights tribunal cases recently, I believe, about zoning against students in Hamilton and other things like this. It has been a consistent principle in the courts that municipal governments cannot zone who lives in a place, but can only zone whether or not it's permissible for people to live there.
Through you, Madam Speaker, yes, that is correct. Zoning is all about use, not user, and that is consistent with the court and human rights decisions.
Thank you. To shelter, housing, and support staff, the basic reason that we're here today is that we have a need to find new shelters. We attempted to find new shelter spaces under the existing zoning bylaw, and we found that we simply couldn't do it unless we made changes. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that is correct. So we've been looking for many sites over the last 24 months. We've been successful with 16 sites, but that's out of looking at 400. It's important to note that we don't get the vast majority, or we don't choose to go to the vast majority of sites. A small subset did not meet these specific performance standards. I think there's only one of those left on that list. All of those are gone, which is another part of the reason they go quickly. So the reason for coming here to change this. But even of those 33, many of those we wouldn't have actively gone after for programmatic reasons. So this is to provide the most flexibility. When you look at more than 400 sites or 400 sites and you only get 12, it's to make sure that every site counts, and this may provide us an opportunity in the future.
And I'm not sure who this next question is to. I mean, we need to be honest that if you put in a shelter without social supports and without programming, there can be an impact on the community. But that's not really a planning or zoning issue. That's a decision on the part of this council about whether or not we fund appropriate supports. Is that a sort of correct way to understand that?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Bylaw?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, could you run through the process that you have in picking a location for a shelter? Is it just an empty building?
Through you, Madam Chair. There are a number of stages that we take. The first is real estate conducts a search for us based on some parameters, of which zoning requirements is one of the first hurdles. Once we've located a site, we often go and do a site visit, and we do a site assessment to determine both the physical nature of the building and also of the community surrounding it. If it seems like the site is a viable program, then real estate pursues discussions with the owner. And if the owner is interested in our use, then we may proceed to put in an offer on the building.
But you do look at the services around a community, proximity of the services that that own community needs, correct?
Absolutely. We have a fairly comprehensive checklist that we go through with every site to identify those things.
And we have different kinds of shelters as well that serve our different communities, from women's shelters that are victims of domestic violence to family shelters to men's shelters, correct?
That's correct, Councillor, and that's also, Deputy Mayor, that's also one of the things we take into consideration as we're siting the shelter, is we try to predict the population that we'll put into that shelter to determine it's fit with that community and it's fit with the local services.
And do you involve the community in those discussions? I thought the new process actually had a robust community involvement when we're placing the new shelters.
Absolutely. When we've determined that a shelter is going to that location, we engage with all of the local facilities and the local organizations, as well as the BIAs and the local community as well.
Right. And remind us again, how many shelter beds do we have to open?
We have to open 1,000 under the new program requested by Council last year. We have tentatively secured almost just more than half of those, so we continue to look for about 8 more sites.
Is this change, would that facilitate that process to locate those shelter beds?
It would keep some options at least to go through the first hurdle. The first hurdle, as I said, is looking at the zoning. So, it would allow us to do the next stage, which is to do that comparison of what is the community capacity fit with the population that we intend to bring there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford?
Thanks very much. Through the Speaker. I think to Chief Planner maybe, the report it's mentioned that 15% of the potential shelter sites that staff had looked at in 2018 were rejected because of zoning bylaw barriers. Do you have the number of actual locations that were impacted by that?
I'll direct that question to Shelter.
Through the chair, not off the top of my head, but we could get that for you. It's probably in the range of 50 or so.
Okay, so roughly 50 potential sites that we weren't able to provide shelter services in because of this zoning barrier that we have on the books right now.
Yeah, it's 56, and that we would move to the next stage and consider.
Okay, so they're not like necessarily default to shelters going there, but we've taken them out of that discussion. They are sites that that we should be looking at that we're not able to look at because of these zoning bylaw restrictions as they are today.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay, and we have the 1,000 shelter bed plan that we've, as a council, committed to and we're supporting. Is there a risk that we wouldn't be able to deliver on those shelter beds if we deferred this today?
Through the chair, that's correct. We've been working as hard as possible on these sites. We've been successful with 16 that we'll be opening, but we require another 8.
I think this would be maybe to planning. When we actually passed this bylaw originally, the shelter bylaw here, with respect to zoning, did we originally have a separation distance?
The original staff report dating back to 2003 did not include a staff recommendation for a separation distance. That was introduced by the community councils and ultimately council, and then ultimately considered at an OMB hearing.
Okay, so that was brought in through the OMB. Today we're looking at removing some of those restrictions, and the idea is this would allow us to look at more sites to consider for shelter services.
Yes, essentially, as Mr. Raft has indicated, we've had a problem in our search work that we've done. The experience to date has represented has identified a problem on about 15% of the time. So it's an indicative situation that we want to improve by removing these 2 potential barriers, knowing that each and every time an exhaustive search is done, criteria are applied. This won't help us in every situation, but it is indicative of the kind of help we need to land shelters in this city in a responsible manner.
So it's additional flexibility for us to look at sites to deliver those shelter services that we've committed to, and what we're hearing from SSHA is that a deferral or referral of this item today will actually put us at risk in being able to deploy the shelter beds that we've committed to.
That's correct.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm still going to play the new kid card. I'm still wrapping my head around some things. Yeah, does it? Can you just remind me, what are the targets that the City of Toronto has in terms of number of beds?
Through the chair, we are actively pursuing the 1,000 shelter bed program over 3 years. We have 16 sites located. Some are open, some are in the process of being opened, and we require an additional 8 sites.
An additional 8 sites. If this motion doesn't go through today, will the city be able to meet that goal of 1,000 in 3 years?
Through the chair, it will be harder to meet that goal in the coming 18 months. The more challenges that we face in finding sites, the harder it is to obtain those sites. Even looking at all of those sites that we had talked about, the 400, we were only successful with 12 out of that 400.
When was this current policy put in place?
These zoning provisions date back 20 years.
20 years. And people are feeling, so zoning and planning is not my area of expertise, and people have told me that you're not allowed to people zone. Is that correct?
Yes, as previously discussed, the focus of the zoning bylaw is on the land use and not the user.
Okay, so we can't say homeless people can't live here.
Again, the focus of the zoning, yeah, essentially yes, in this situation, but we try to focus on the impact of the building and the impacts that it has on its surroundings. So we would, if a municipal shelter was proposed in an area, it would have to comply with the height limit in the area, the setbacks, any open space provisions. All those performance standards that apply in that zone would apply to this land use. And then the users, in this case, occupants of the shelter, would be managed and provided for by the program provided by the city under shelter housing and support.
And if we don't do this, then, just so I'm crystal clear, like, is this like a legal implications associated with this? Like, is this breaking human rights laws? Like, how does this work?
The bylaw is in front of council. It's been through a statutory process. It's in your hands. It's to decide whether or not you want to amend the bylaw and eliminate these provisions. Our advice is, as it was in 2003, is that separation distance is not recommended because it deals more with the user than the use. Our advice stands 20 years later that this is not the way to approach the placement of shelters in the city.
Okay, thanks for helping New Kid out.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just want to use a real situation. I think everybody knows a shelter that's about to open up in my ward, a men's shelter over on Kingston Road. We make these changes. The potential, the possibility of having, say, another shelter open up down the street, would that be a reasonable conclusion if we support these recommendations?
Through the chair, as discussed earlier, we would make sure that we look at the program. We don't want to have too much intensification. We would consider all of those pieces when we're looking at an individual site.
So, again, with this particular shelter that I had, very contentious in the community. By the way, they actually are very pleased a couple of years later, so it's a very positive process we've gone through. But the concern back then is you open up a shelter, and just down the street, there could be a potential another shelter. So you're saying that may not necessarily be the case. We still need to go through a proper process to ensure that we can, it meets many, many other needs then. So this is not, my community will be looking at this going, oh man, we'll be able to open up another shelter just like next door. That's not the case if we support this.
Through the chair, again, staff would look at all of those pieces and make sure that we take a reasonable approach to that and the appropriateness of further locations. We would evaluate any location on its merits and would certainly consider an existing site in that decision.
Okay, and of course with that, you're looking at the proper community consultation that would have to take place as part of that process.
Through the chair, that's correct. Council passed the process last year of the new community consultation process, so we would follow that exact process that council passed last year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
I just have a question because the deputants that came to, a number of them that came to the committee, and someone in particular who had been with LAO for many years, and this would be to the city solicitor, indicated that if we don't get this right and remove these, that we'll now be subject to a human rights complaint. And I'm taking that very seriously, that they're saying that we were essentially, when this got brought in, we're zoning, so we might be subject to a human rights complaint.
Through you, Madam Speaker, I of course can't predict whether a human rights complaint will be made. However, staff are recommending that these changes be made, and my staff have been involved and worked with planning on this.
And I guess, Mr. Linton, you were at the committee and you heard that some of the people who are lawyers basically saying it could serve as a human rights complaint if you don't realign the policy.
I think through the speaker, addressing our legacy bylaws, if you will, in respect of distance separations in particular, is something that we're mindful of given the human rights issues that have been raised over the last 10 to 20 years.
Yes.
This council did amend its group home bylaws in 2012 to remove the separation distance provisions. So it's entirely consistent for this council to continue to address separation distance issues in its
and any
zoning bylaw.
potential impact of finding ourselves at the Human Rights Commission.
I can't speculate as to whether or not someone would come forward, but it does expose that area of concern, yes.
Well, they could come forward, and apparently the Human Rights Commission would not be able to say, sorry, that's not in our jurisdiction. Have we been at the Human Rights Commission many times as a city? Who can answer that?
Through you, Madam Speaker, yes, we have on various issues.
And how did we do?
Well, generally speaking, the city does very well in most of its litigation. I can't speak specifically, though, about human rights complaints, or because I don't have statistics on that.
I see. You don't have the statistics if when we're taken on different issues.
No,
How?
no, and through you, Madam Speaker, we are taken to the city is subject of human rights complaints for various things.
Correct. But for policy matters, not individual matters.
From time to time, yes.
From time to time. So that's very possible we could end up there, in your mind. It's not out of the realm of possibilities.
Madam Speaker, I would agree with that, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, speakers. Mayor Tory.
Well, Madam Speaker, thank you. I wanted to speak at the outset of this debate, just in order to try and, I guess, put things into the context within which I look at them. I'll start by stating the obvious, which is that the people expect us to act in regard to those who are struggling. And we've had many a discussion here, even in the short time that I've been here, about the fact that there are people struggling, unfortunately, in increased numbers in our city, and that especially relates to the issue of homelessness. And it is left to us to determine what needs to be done and to achieve the kind of balance that is necessary in terms of the rules and conditions and all the different competing interests in order to ultimately try to determine what is in the public interest with respect to helping those who are hurting. So inside here we have to lead, and that involves not just making the decision to act, but also carrying through with that normally to sort of decide on exactly how we will make sure that that action actually occurs. We make things happen. And so on shelter and homelessness, where we all agree we have a significant challenge, we took a decision. And there were quite a few debates in here. We took a decision. We've made a number of decisions, but certainly one that comes to mind fairly recently was we took a decision to add 1,000 shelter beds because we knew there was a need there for people who were struggling, and it was our responsibility to make sure that we address that. And at the same time, in parallel, we've taken actions even in this term of this new council to begin to really address the real long-term answer to this, which is a dramatically increased supply of affordable housing and supportive housing, just to name two examples. And so we did all those things, not just because of the need that was out there created by situations like the number of asylum claimants and so on, but also because we had to prepare for what I think will be a very happy day, quite frankly, in the life of the city, which will be the day we begin not only to tear down Seton House, but to rebuild there a dignified, compassionate, modern, diverse complex that I think we're going to be very proud of. And I'm proud of the fact that on my watch here, our watch, we have included that thing for the first time in the city's capital plan, and that work is proceeding so that we'll be able to get on with that before too long. So we know the what of what it is that we need to do here. We know the why of how we have to do it, and one of the other issues that comes before us, and none of these are easy, is the where. It's the where. Where are we going to be making available as needed the shelter and the other kinds of support for people who are in need of our help? And we presently rely on making those decisions, the city administration broadly does, on a series of bylaw criteria that I believe I'm right in saying were put in place in 2003, some 16 years ago. So we have the benefit of not only looking at those and saying, well, are they, I think it was a time of different need in the city. It was a time of different real estate reality in the city. But also we have 15 years, 16 years of being able to look and see whether some of the parameters of those rules achieved the public policy objective they were meant to achieve, or in fact may have had some unintended consequences. And whatever constructive results there may have been, I can only describe as unintended results the fact that, for example, the 80 meter from an arterial street rule had the effect, if I'm right in remembering my numbers, of excluding 33 potential sites for shelters when we have a need for all the reasons I previously mentioned. And if you sort of think about 80 meters and say, well, where did that number come from? I don't even know where it came from, but the bottom line is, if we look at it today when we're standing here, it's a 1-minute walk I think the idea was in the direction of accessibility to people who were needing to get to a shelter, and that they wouldn't be too far from a street with all that it has, including but not limited to public transit. But it's a 1-minute walk, and is that really in 2019 the right measure, if there is a right measure, to apply to the siting of a shelter like this? So in the end, because I'm getting to the end of my time, Madam Speaker, I think this comes down to 3 things, not so much any arbitrary measure, whatever number you wanted to pick. I think it comes down to 3 things. First of all, do we have confidence and trust in the judgment of our city staff? The challenge that we've put in front of them and that the people have put in front of them, I will tell you for my sake that I do. I do. Secondly, do we have confidence in ourselves as councillors that we can work with the staff and with citizens to make sure that we find appropriate places across the city to have shelters as needed? And we also, from time to time, will, as a group, staff and councillors, find places where they're not suitable, but not subject to some arbitrary rule, but rather subject to sort of good judgment and good discussion that can happen. And I've seen examples of that that involve people in this chamber. And then finally, do we have confidence in the people? Do we have confidence in the people? And I will tell you that it's been increasingly heartening to me over the 4 years that I've been here that not only are shelters not as much anymore a subject of great division, but I've seen the examples, including at the Lamport Respite Centre, where the community has adopted those shelters and came in and put on trivia nights. And when I was there at Christmas time at Lamport, they were in with Christmas ornaments, setting up a Christmas tree so that the people there would feel at home at Christmas time. I was proud of that. And I know this city and this council and our staff, mostly the people, are quite capable of dealing with this in a manner that doesn't require an arbitrary standard, requires goodwill and good judgment, all of which I think we have in abundance. And so I will be proudly supporting this as being the right thing to do in this instance. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Cressy.
Well, thank you, Speaker. It was 18 months ago in this chamber when I moved a motion directing staff to report back on this very item. And I'll tell you why I initially moved that. Because the restrictions on zoning came to my mind when there was a site located within Kensington Market that we wanted to purchase for a shelter. There was a site that went up for sale that the neighborhood came to me and said this would be an ideal location for a shelter. And so here you had a neighborhood with a history in Kensington Market of being a welcoming place for all. And you had members of the community who said, we want a shelter here. And when we went to shelter staff, they said, it would be a great site, but it doesn't meet the city's restrictive zoning provisions. That's what this means. That site could have been purchased and could have been in operation today had we acted. And so, in the context of this debate, I could say a lot about service delivery and the alignment with wraparound services and supports, and many have talked about that. And I think I could say a lot about City Council's own target to open 1,000 new permanent beds and the challenges of IDing locations based on the current onerous restrictions. And I could say a lot about the critical conversation we are having about not just adding shelter beds, but providing pathways out of shelter beds and into housing. But I will cast my vote on this based on one simple principle, and that is we should not use zoning as a means of determining who gets to live where in this great city of ours. That we do not implement zoning restrictions on where seniors or teenagers can live. We don't implement zoning restrictions on where you can live if you're middle or upper class, and we don't implement zoning restrictions based on your race, whether you're black or white. And that principle, most importantly, is what applies here, that we cannot use zoning restrictions to prevent those who are vulnerable and experiencing homelessness from living in certain neighborhoods. I'll come back to Kensington Market. It's a neighborhood I used to represent. Now it's represented by Councillor Layton. And the history of Kensington is and has always been a welcoming place for everyone. That neighborhood sought to purchase a piece of property to open a shelter, and they couldn't because of our zoning restrictions. Our city should be for everyone. This motion today, these staff recommendations today, will help to make that a little bit more so. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fillion.
Thank you. So I have a motion that City Council refer the item to the Chief Planner and Executive Director, City Planning, and direct the Chief Planner and Executive Director, City Planning, and the General Manager, Shelter and Housing Administration to report to the Planning and Housing Committee as soon as possible. And as soon as possible could mean its next meeting, on alternative solutions to provide additional shelter housing sites in appropriate locations. So there is no disagreement here. I want to be really clear. There is no disagreement from me that we need to provide more shelter housing, that we need to meet the needs of this city to house people who need it, who are not currently getting that housing. No disagreement here. I'm also a big proponent and believer in public process. And public process should be like for everything, even like when we build a new school, something that's good, we have a public process. And to eliminate public process on something that has a major impact or could have a major impact on a neighborhood, whether positive or negative, should only be done if there is no other way of doing it. So all I'm proposing here is that we look at, here's what the situation is. We need this many more shelter spaces. Here are the possible locations. Here's how the current rules don't allow us to do those. Here's how we adjust those rules in order to do what we want to do. And I think that can be done through an adjustment to the rules, not by eliminating all rules. And if I'm wrong about that, then when this comes back here, if it does, I would stand up and say, I thought we could tweak the rules, but I was wrong, and we can't, so I will support what is coming, the recommendations that are coming forward. I think we owe it to our communities, and I'm talking again about public process, how we do things here in determining what goes where. We owe it to our communities to see if there's a way to do that. I don't have a problem standing in front of a community and telling them all kinds of inconvenient truths that that we need to raise our taxes above the rate of inflation, and we need other sources of funding to build the city we want to build. Why a big building they don't want has to go in because it complies with the official plan, or that a shelter is needed at a certain location, and as people who care about other people, we should be allowing that. I don't have a problem doing that, and hopefully all the rest of us don't either. What I can't stand up in front of people and defend is why we voted to completely cut them out of the process, to cut ourselves out of the process, and to cut them out of the process. I don't believe in that. I believe that people are fundamentally intelligent and good, and there is not if you're going to do that, you have to have a very good reason to do it. So I think this can probably, I think there probably is a solution here. And I'm not, I'll say this about the Planning and Housing Committee, is it, I think, has more brain power than any other committee in the city. It has more passion to do good things. It has more advocacy. It is what I saw who was on the committee, I thought, wow, that's fantastic.
He's saying this because he's between Kristen and I.
And yes, but when I see this issue coming forward the way it did, it makes me think, you know what, there's a lens missing here. There's a bit of a blind spot. And, I think that is fundamentally caused by the fact that 5 of the 6 members of the committee are from the Toronto and East York Community Council. And it's a great committee, but you need to also see this from the lens of other parts of the city that are just different in many ways. They have a different history, they have a different culture, they have different housing forms.
Thank you, Councillor Fillion. Thank you. We do have a question for you, Councillor Bailao.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Speaker, to the councillor. I appreciate the concern about the public consultation, but I'm wondering if you understand that there's nothing that we remove from the public consultation, that the robust public consultation continues to exist around the placement. Actually, in the last year and a half, that has been significantly increased, the consultation, the way that we involve communities in the shelter locations.
I don't believe that's the case, and I certainly don't believe that's the case with the bringing forward of this issue. I don't think, I think most people don't even know what's
So by removing these considerations, the only thing we're doing is putting more options on the table.
Councillor Bailao, Councillor Fillion has asked for a referral, so just clarification on the referral.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, but the reason for the referral is the lack of public consultation. Yeah. So I'm just trying to understand, to make sure that the member understands.
The reason for the referral is to try to tweak the rules rather than
because of the lack of public consultation. You say that there's no lack of public, there's no public consultation.
That's extreme oversimplification of what I said. What I said is, I think we can solve the problem by tweaking the rules rather than eliminating them and cutting the public out in certain locations. But if I'm wrong about that, then I would support your recommendations. And hopefully this could come back to us as soon as next council meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll speak to the referral.
Yes, after we do the questions, we'll have to speak on the referral, because we're at referral. Councillor Perks, a question on the motion?
Thank you, Speaker. To follow along the line of questioning that Councillor or Deputy Mayor Bailao started, so you object to the current process by which shelters are approved?
No.
Okay, so in the current process by which shelters are approved, there is no public consultation. There's public information nights, but there's no committee of adjustment, no council vote, no zoning review, no nothing.
Yes, because as we heard from the chief planner, when we adopted this in 2003, after listening to people in community councils, we created some location rules, being
no, that's
primarily
not the question I'm asking. That's not
Yeah.
the question I'm asking. The question I'm asking is very specific. For a shelter that's approved without this amendment to the zoning bylaw, it does not come to this council for approval. It does not go to the Committee of Adjustment for approval. There is no decision-making through a formal city mechanism. It's done delegated to staff. Do you object to that for the current locations that are permitted?
No.
You only want to object to that in new locations.
No, again, that's an oversimplification of what I'm trying to achieve. What I'm trying to find out is if we can tweak the existing rules. So they seem to work for a period of time. They seem to not be working at the moment because they are too restrictive for some locations which staff think are appropriate, and I think which the councillors think are appropriate. So let's tweak the rules to solve that problem rather than eliminate the rules. That's all I'm saying. And if I'm wrong about that, then I'll say I'm wrong about that, and we couldn't fix the problem by tweaking.
Did I hear you correctly that you, in your remarks about why we should refer this item, is that you always object to uses going in without some kind of public process? Did I hear you correctly?
Yep.
Yet you don't object to the shelter use going in currently permitted areas without that public process. So your objection is only for the new locations, not for the current locations.
No, my objection is to, I believe, unnecessarily extending the rules by which we cut out public consultation.
I now know why I have to vote against your referral.
Thank you. Councillor Karygiannis, clarification of the motion.
Again, please.
It's a referral.
Oh, sorry, I had questions of the motion.
Yeah, his motion is a referral.
Well, yes, I'd like to ask a couple of questions, if I may.
Yeah, there it is, right there.
Thank you very much. So, Councillor, you're referring it to the committee in order to have more robust engagement in the community?
No, I'm not. I'm referring it back to staff for report to the committee to see if we can tweak the existing rules to accomplish what I hope we all think needs to be done, which is build more shelters.
Is there any piece in there that you want to see regarding more consultation with the community before we put up a shelter in a particular area?
No, again, it's a misrepresentation of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to see if we can tweak the rules so that we don't expand the non-consultation zone, for lack of a better way of saying it.
What is it that you would like to see tweaked that it's not there right now?
Well, if I knew all of that, I just would have made an amendment. I don't want to make
Thank you very much.
amendments that don't make any sense or
Okay.
don't solve the problem.
Now, if we can clear the, well, okay, yeah, the middle screen. So we're on the referral now. Anybody that wants to speak on the referral, you have 2 minutes. Okay, we'll go to a vote on the referral, recorded vote.
Councillor Lai, please.
The referral motion does not carry. The vote is 7 to 17.
Okay, next speaker, Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, sorry, that was in the asked questions. I forgot to take it out.
Oh, okay. Councillor Bradford to speak.
Thanks very much, Madam Speaker. This is a really important thing for us to do today. As we've heard over and over, we don't zone for people. We zone for use. And we really do need to try our best and be careful not to conflate the idea that separation distances somehow address the issues associated with the concentration of shelters. Density is based on many different factors. Most important, of course, is need, but also the viability and the availability of the sites. Today we heard that more than 50 sites have actually been taken out of consideration because of our zoning bylaws. More specifically, 33 sites have been taken out of consideration because of these particular amendments that we need to make today. And we've also heard that delaying this will compromise our ability to deliver on our commitment, this council's commitment of 1,000 new shelter beds. During the budget process, I asked questions about why we were significantly underspent on the shelter budgets. Just over 50%, 55%. And what we heard was the ability to locate sites, the viability of these sites was part of that issue. If resolving the zoning issues that we've been at for more than 18 months now, Councillor Cressy brought that motion forward 18 months ago. Staff have been working tirelessly on this. We've done consultation. There is a consultation process through the shelters. If resolving those zoning issues removes one more barrier to delivering on our council commitment for those 1,000 new shelter beds, then we should be wholeheartedly supporting this motion. I hope that all of you will come with us on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Really appreciate the thoughts and the concerns that were raised, and certainly I had some concerns about the deferral motion. That's why I supported it. However, I do like to speak about one particular case that I asked staff yesterday, and I found it a little bit strange. In an employment zone, we can actually put up a hotel. Fair enough. So if the city was to to build a hotel and then turn around and rent it to ourselves, then we can put homeless people in there. And yet, when a community association says, I got free space, we'll divide it, we'll work with the zoning and all that stuff in order to bring homeless people in, what does the building department do? The planning department? No. So that's where my concern is. On one side, we can go down, just go around it, but on the other side, when somebody steps forward and says, I can put up 150 beds, we certainly say no. So as we vote on today and we move on this file, I bring those matters to your attention, and hopefully that can be something that can be looked at.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Speaker, I rise to support the item in front of us. First and foremost, I want to thank the staff in shelter and support, as well as our planning staff, recognizing that we're actually failing to meet our own mandate, this council's mandate, recognizing the challenges that they're actually having. When this particular policy came into place, I don't believe I was a councillor at that time, because it's quite some time ago before I became a member of this council. I recall being here, though, and the discussion was essentially to zone for people. It was to restrict people to be located in certain areas. That was the intent of it. We know now that from the solicitor, first of all, that's illegal, it's discriminatory. I don't think anyone of us want to be part of that particular practice. I think we want to address some fundamental challenges and needs that exist in this city. Our staff have been doing an amazing job. I know this because I meet with them often, because the Shelter and Support Services comes under the community development piece of what I'm responsible for as Chair of Economic and Community Development. And I think we need to be strong with respect to the focus and the attention that we put to these particular matters. There are those who would want to suggest that it's okay to restrict, obviously, the entrance of certain people in certain neighborhoods. And I don't stand for that, and I know you don't either. I just want to address a comment that my colleague from Scarborough has made, and through the questioning of staff regarding the use of employment lands and looking at setting up a hotel, and he did reference a specific name of an organization. This was a matter that's in my ward that's been going on for almost 5-6 years. And a group purchased a particular site, knowing that they couldn't put a variety of different uses that were not allowed in employment lands. And they've tried to finagle around and try to, what I would use the term is to manipulate our processes. They've gone to the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, the Mayor, the former Premier, the current Premier, and so on, to get the uses to be allowed in the area, knowing full well that at the outset, when they asked if they could permit this use was permitted, they were told no. And they've come forward saying, well, we want to create shelters for a variety of different uses and so on. We know full well that's not really what they wanted to do. It was a variety of other things, but they wanted to use this as a vehicle to provide, obviously, a solution to address what they wanted as a preferential purpose use of a particular site that was not zoned for what they had intended to do. So I think for those who will vote against this today, I think you sent a strong signal to suggest, quite frankly, the council decision that has been made to ensure that we can address the issue that deals with our most vulnerable citizens, that you're not with us on that. So go ahead, vote against it.
Okay. Well, we have one more speaker, Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I also will be rising to support the recommendations that staff have put in front of us today. I do recognize that some of the concerns that members of council have expressed is not necessarily about the location, I believe. It's actually about the performance and the service delivery of the shelters, and sometimes we know we have gotten it wrong in the past. We would never, ever replicate the creation of, for example, a Seton House. We know that is not the way to go. 550 people crammed into an institution doesn't work. I also think that the planning and housing initiative right now that's before us in terms of the amendments to zoning and creating greater as-of-right permissions is not really the tool. I mean, first of all, it's definitely not the tool that we need to get to the source of those concerns. The source of those concerns is really about operations. And that is a different conversation. It is not about zoning. It is not about land use. That has to go through the Economic and Community Development Committee. That goes to the shelter standards. It goes to our third-party partnerships that are out there. That's where we address the operational pieces. I'm holding in my hands a report from the Ontario Human Rights Commission. It's called In the Zone, Housing, Human Rights, and Municipal Planning. It's a it's a short read. I want to just highlight that for everyone. It is a very short read. But at the core of it, it actually talks about the things that we cannot do as a municipality. As a municipality, especially as elected officials, we are not exempt from the Ontario Human Rights Commission. We don't get to override that. The Ontario Human Rights Code is a quasi-constitutional document, and it actually overrides the Planning Act, the Building Act, and it overrides the Municipal Code. It will even override the City of Toronto Act. So if we actually contravene the human rights of individuals, including where they get to live or where they get to stay, or even if they're temporarily accommodated, we are then violating their human rights. And it's absolutely critical that we don't use a land use planning tool to facilitate that. And I know that we will most likely lose precedent after precedent. Municipalities, local governments, territories, and provinces, whenever they run up against the Human Rights Code, they will lose. And it also speaks to the values of ourselves as a city, as an elected body. And I want to just make it really clear is that it's really difficult right now for staff to place shelters. It's also difficult for rooming houses. It's been difficult with secondary suites. It's been difficult around halfway houses. It's been difficult around transitional homes as supportive housing. It's every step of the way, there has been challenges for people who are low income, who are homeless, who are receiving social assistance to find accommodation. And in the middle of a housing crisis, the last thing we need to do as an order of government whose primary function is to govern around land use planning, we cannot be putting up another obstacle. So its time has come. I hope that we actually can support what's before us unanimously. I think it's very important. And I think I want to just share with you, it's like, as a councillor who has 2,000 plus shelter beds in her ward, and a number of halfway homes, a number of transitional and supportive housing, and I have almost 35% of TCHC housing. The entire stock of the entire city is currently now reallocated in the new Ward 13. I know the challenges of the community, and I know that it would make a big difference to everyone if we can actually think proactively and constructively around housing with a human rights lens. Everyone has a right to housing and accommodation. This is a fundamental, basic covenant that comes all the way from the UN. The international community is asking us, by way of our government, our national government, who has signed on a number of these treaties. And we as a subnational government are bound by that. And what I find extremely frustrating is that we can't talk about the housing crisis without delivering outcomes. Yes, we've underspent and have underperformed in finding and locating those shelters, but it's also critically important to know that some of the criteria are wrong. Should we be looking for 20,000 square feet of facility to put 100 people into a building when we know that best practices tells us that we should really be looking at about 25 to 50 beds per facility? We got to get that right as well. And so, but that's not before us today. What's before us is only the zoning piece. I think we need to move this forward as soon as possible. Thank you.
Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I stand today to support the report that staff put forward. And I think that we all know, and we've all spoken about the pressure that our shelter system is under. And when we have a report that says that we've missed the opportunity on 50% of the sites to locate the 1,000 beds that this council has approved and that we much need in our city, because the pressure is not getting any lighter, it's actually continues to be quite steady. So the need to have these beds and to not have a crisis every fall and every winter, and to make sure that we give the tools to our staff to find these beds. You know, it's not only enough to come here and say, okay, we're approving 1,000 beds. We have to set up and to give the tools to our staff to succeed in finding these beds. And when they come to us and saying there's something that is preventing us from all the sites that we've looked, there was 15% of these sites that we think we could take further. We could actually find some more beds. We can't really just turn around and say, no, we're not going to give you this. Because of a zoning bylaw that says that it has to be 80 meters, and like the mayor said, it's a minute walking distance from a main street. And on something that we know that we have been advised that we can actually be even challenged on a human rights basis, because we are now zoning on based on what, that homeless people can't live in our neighborhoods, that we have to place people within a certain distance. Let's be honest, we do have a public process. We've changed actually the public process around shelters. We know that there has been some issues in the past. We've changed that process. We've changed the services that actually go inside a shelter. We have committed and are working on the supportive housing and housing issues, and actually there will be further motions later today to talk about this. But the reality is that is still pressure going on in our system. This chamber has approved 1,000 beds. We need to get on with building 1,000 beds. And I truly believe that all 25 of my colleagues, and including the mayor, can do the work with their communities to bring the services that is needed. Because these are services that are not needed just in one pocket of the city. Homelessness, unfortunately, is well in the four corners of the city, is well all over the city. And so when we talk about putting shelters in our communities, it's actually to address an issue. The same way that we place a library, that we place a school, we should be talking about placing a shelter to serve our communities and all the wraparound services that should be going around those shelters. So I hope that we can move forward. I hope that we can assist our staff in getting these 1,000 beds open, and actually to make something that I think is very wrong right, and is not to zone for people once and for all, and actually do the right thing, do the work that we need, and to bring these services and to work with our communities to bring the services that are needed in the communities.
Okay, on the item, recorded vote.
Councillor Carroll, please.
The item is adopted 17-5.
Okay, members, now, before we break for lunch, we'll go into camera to discuss CA 4.1 and CA 4.2, which is civic appointments. Motion to go in camera. Who's got the motion? Pardon? Who's got the motion? Oh. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
That council recess its public session to meet as committee of the whole in closed session to consider appointment, CC 4.1, appointment of public members to the Toronto Transit Commission, the reason for confidential information, personal matters about identifiable individuals who are being considered for appointment to the Toronto Transit Commission, and CA 4.2, appointment of a public member of the Toronto Public Library Board, reason for confidential information, personal matters about identifiable individual who are being considered for appointment to the Toronto Public Library Board.
Okay, thank you. All in favor? Carried. Okay, so if I can ask everyone to, public to vacate the council chambers. Okay, thank you. City Council has completed its closed session consideration of items CA 4.1 and CA 4.2 on appointments of public members to the Toronto Transit Commission and the Toronto Public Library Board. No motions were made in closed session. City Council will now recess for lunch and resume at 2 p.m.